Hello and welcome to Tales from the Archives. My name is Dan Dyck. I'm your host, and I'll be here every week to bring you stories about fascinating people, places, and events from the Mennonite Heritage Archives. I first developed an interest in Mennonite history when I met Conrad Stoesz. Conrad is the archivist at the Mennonite Heritage Archives and a former colleague. We used to meet at lunchtimes and coffee breaks where Conrad shared compelling stories about Mennonite history. Those stories got me hooked. I began doing research and writing for the Mennonite Historian, and now I help make this weekly program, Tales from the Archives. In future episodes, we'll be sharing stories about people like Klaus Brandt, an engineer who had a hand in building Winnipeg's water aqueduct from Shoal Lake; Agneta Wiebe, writing letters from the Soviet Union to her family in North America; a photo collection from Annette de Graaf left behind in Canada, and many more. But in this first episode, I'll have a conversation with Conrad about his work and how the Mennonite Heritage Archives connects people with each other and the past. Hello, Conrad. Welcome here.
Hi, Dan. It's good to see you again.
Conrad, what was the first spark that really piqued your curiosity in Mennonite history?
Well, for me, it was a grade 11 history project. We were supposed to research our family history and make a report about it. So I made my family tree, and then I decided, I'd like to interview some people. And I got my mom to help me with this. My mom is a networker, a natural networker, and she knew a number of distant relatives, and she'd say, oh yeah, Grandpa used to say we were related to them. And so we'd call them up and ask about having a meeting, and they'd usually say yes. And then we'd go over to their house and we'd talk, and the first thing was always to figure out, well, how are we related? And then I would sit and ask questions and listen to their stories, and it was fascinating. I listened to stories from people who lived through the flu epidemic in 1918. They were young adults at that time. Such a different reality than what I was living in. And so I was fascinated by that. And I wrote my report, and I got a good mark on it. But from there, it just continued to grow. I continued to be interested in Mennonite history. So I attended CMBC, now CMU, and I took all the family history and Mennonite history courses I could find. And I even did an independent study in Mennonite history, Mennonite family history. I created big charts and books of genealogy. I was looking at microfilm in the archives. And then it's kept on going since then.
And how long have you been involved in archival work, and what maintains your fascination with Mennonite history?
My first job at the archives was actually a student when I was at CMBC in about 1993. I was helping archivist Lawrence Klippenstein respond to family history inquiries. Then I had a number of summer jobs working in the archives thanks to some summer grants. And then I was at the right place at the right time, and I landed 2 half-time jobs in the archives. Half-time at the Mennonite Heritage Archives, then known as the Mennonite Heritage Center, and the other half-time at the Center for Mennonite Brethren Studies, connected with Concord College. And I kept those 2 half-time jobs from 1999 till 2017, when I became full-time at the Mennonite Heritage Archives. What keeps me here is the interesting stories. I find it fascinating, all these stories that are in the archives of people asking these interesting questions, and I get to be part of it.
How old is the Mennonite Heritage Archives, and how did it get started?
Well, that in itself is an interesting story. In Imperial Russia, Peter Brown thought the Mennonite community needed an archive. So he made this recommendation to church leaders, and they agreed with him and made him the archivist. So he was collecting materials from the Mennonite community to put in his archive. But then during the Russian Revolution, he was getting a little concerned about this archive that would become a target. So he began moving it around. I mean, that's not a small task, moving all these boxes of materials around. But then finally in 1929, the Soviets found this archive and confiscated it. And he thought it was gone forever. It was lost. And in despair, he wrote to his friend Bernard Schellenberg in Winnipeg saying, you have to start over. This is such an important endeavor that you need to do this in Winnipeg and create an archive for our Mennonite people. So Schellenberg took that to heart, and he made a recommendation, a resolution at the Conference of Mennonites in Canada meetings in 1933 that the conference should start an archive. And it passed, and the powers that be made Schellenberg the first archivist. So he set to work in collecting materials. He was writing articles in the denominational paper, encouraging people to value the past, value archival materials, and to send it to him. But then Schellenberg got into trouble at his local congregation, and he was no longer a member there. And so the conference said, well, if you're not a member at your local congregation, you can't be the conference archivist. Well, that didn't sit very well with Schellenberg. He'd put his heart and soul into this project. He took his material hostage and hid it in his friend Jacob Rempel's basement. He said that he wanted to be compensated for all the work that he had done, and the conference didn't want to pay him anything for that. So after a few years and some negotiations, an agreement was in place, and the materials did come back to the archive. Benjamin Avert was the next archivist, and then Henry Epp. And then 1974, in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of Mennonites in Manitoba, Lawrence Klippenstein became the first paid archivist. And then, thanks to the work of businessman Peter W. Entz of Winkler, the first building was built in 1978 and was dedicated in 1979. So this is the Mennonite Heritage Archives building that we now know. And at that time, it was a new push to really emphasize that the archives was an inter-Mennonite archive, not just a denominational archive, but an archive for all Mennonite groups. And that's a value that we continue on with today.
So we went from documents that were held for ransom to a building now that's specifically made for archives. What is the role of the archives in the Mennonite community today?
The archives is a memory institution, along with museums and libraries. The archives holds the memories of the Mennonite community, and it's here for the community to access as is needed. It's an important factor in the creation and evolution of a community's identity. The archives is a gift from one generation to the next, a gift from past generations to the future.
Now, I remember feeling rather intimidated the first time I visited the archives. The tables were covered in research materials and shelves full of books and stacks of newspapers. And then there was the vault, a big room behind the steel door. I saw photo collections, audio recordings, films and videos. Why might all of these materials interest an ordinary person who is not a researcher or not an academic?
Everyone in the community benefits from the archives, even if they don't come to the archives or communicate with the archives. As Professor Tom Nesmith at the University of Manitoba Archival Studies program stated, everyone is a secondary user of archives. We all benefit from the archives through the novels we read, the movies and documentaries we watch, through public policy that gets enacted. Archives benefit everyone because archives are used throughout society, and archives are full of stories. In our case, stories of a people, the Mennonite people, and their struggle to live a faithful life. These are our stories, and I believe we need to tell our stories. Stories of the past have power to meet us where we are and to direct us to the future. If we don't tell our own stories, who will? At our little archive, our team of staff and volunteers, we respond to over 100 requests for information a month. The archive is an active, bustling place full of documents, photos, maps, full of questions, curiosity, answers, and stories.
So what does a typical day in the archives look like for you, Conrad?
Yeah, that's a good question. Every day is different. In our little archive, we hold over 600 meters of archival records. So we stack all the paper on top of each other. It's higher than the CN Tower. We have over 40,000 photographs, 5,000 hours of audio recordings, and my job is to manage this material, create ways of finding information in this material, adding to it, and helping people find the answers that they seek. I work together with Graham Unruh, 2 project workers, Sarah Dyck and Isaiah Letkeman, and about a dozen volunteers. But each day I come to work, I know it'll turn out differently than I expect. A person will come in and need to do research, and we'll have questions. There'll be a phone call or an email that will come that needs attention. Or someone will come with a new donation of materials that I need to take care of. I get really excited about the people doing research here in our archive. Whether it's an anthropologist from New Zealand like James Urry, researching the community of Grunthal, novelist David Bergen, working on his next book, a high school student working on a heritage fair project, or someone from Parks Canada coming and looking to establish a new interpretive sign, or a filmmaker working on telling a story visually. I get excited about all these projects.
You mentioned that one of the things that excites you is when someone brings in a new donation of materials. You must get a lot of offers from people who want to donate materials, and you can't possibly store everyone's records here. How do you decide what you can and can't accept?
I almost always say yes to people who want to show me materials that they want me to consider for the archives. Invariably, they bring materials in together with that family Bible that often are interesting and are historically significant.
How are the archives made accessible to people? Do folks have to come down in person to access information?
Well, the first thing to know is what is in the archives. What do we have? So we work hard at creating things we call finding aids that give not only lists of files, but contextual information about the resources. Context like who created it, where was it created, the dates it was created. When people find materials that they are interested in, we encourage them to come to Winnipeg and come and take a look. But since we are a national archive, we recognize that not everyone can come to the archive. Someone living in Whitehorse, that's a long trip to come to the archive to look at a file. So we work hard at creating access to materials digitally at a cost recovery basis.
Thanks, Conrad, for coming in and chatting with us today. You've hinted at a lot of really interesting stories, some of which we might cover in future episodes. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to the people who volunteer at the archives, to the staff I work with, to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and also Golden West Radio for making this radio opportunity possible. And to you, the listeners, for listening, and people who donate to the archives. Without donations to the archives in monetary materials, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. If you want to listen to this episode or past episodes, or see pictures related to the episodes, find us online at www.mharchives.ca.
Thanks again, Conrad. Will we be hearing more from you in future episodes?
Oh yeah, I'll pop in and out as needed, and I'll also be working behind the scenes collecting materials and resources and stories for the program.
Terrific. We look forward to hearing from you again, Conrad.
Thanks, Dan. Me too.
In an upcoming episode, I'll chat with Ralph Friesen, author of a new history book about Steinbeck during the Great Depression of the 1930s. The book is titled Prosperity Ever, Depression Never. Here's a clip from our chat.
In the audience in Steinbeck, there were a number of people who themselves were born, say, even in the early 30s, and they know the place that I'm talking about. It existed for them. There are a lot of pictures in the book, so that comes through. So that is what they're familiar with. It was there.
Also coming up, I'll chat with Dave Brandt, whose grandfather designed and built a dredge involved in the construction of the Shoal Lake Aqueduct, which continues to supply Winnipeg's drinking water to this day. Dave said the dredge was a highlight of his grandfather's engineering career.
Dredge was probably what he was most proud of in his career. He felt that it was a unique dredge at that time, that it had features that other available machines didn't have, and he felt that that was really one of maybe his greatest professional accomplishment. He was very proud of that. And he and I would talk. He would show me pieces of the dredge. There was a picture that I loved that was in his room when he was an older person. And my dad and I would come and to say goodnight, and he would tell stories. And that was one of the stories he loved to tell about the dredge and the work on the waterline.
I'm looking forward to sharing those upcoming stories with you. The theme song for Tales from the Archives is called Borrowed Shoes and is composed and performed by Juno Award-winning Manitoba recording artist Steve Bell. Thank you, Steve, for allowing us to use this song for our show. Kaylee Dyck and Conrad Stoesz helped research and write this episode. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. You've been listening to Tales from the Archives. Thank you for listening, and tune in again next week for more stories about people, places, and events from the Mennonite Heritage Archives.